Hey everyone, I'm Synthexor and I'm a Diamond/Low Conqueror rated player, and today I'm sharing my perspective on how the civilizations stack up against each other in team games. If you're interested in 1v1s, I've already done a video tier list on that. It's linked up here in the top corner. But again, this is specifically for all 16 currently civilizations in 2v2, 3v3, and 4v4. It's still early days for the YouTube channel, so if you're able to toss a subscription this way, that would be really appreciated. Looking to continue making pretty much daily AoE4 content. But with all that out of the way, let's explain how this is going to work. So I'm going to be ranking the civilizations based on how they perform across all three team modes, which means if there's a civilization that's very good at 2v2, 3v3, and 4v4, they're going to be ranked very high. If there's a civilization that maybe isn't as good in 2v2 when the maps are smaller, but is much better in 4v4 when there's a bit more chaos, a bit more going on, then they'll be ranked a little bit closer, maybe towards the middle, because they have the disadvantage in the smaller modes, but the advantage in the larger modes. But we will be going through each civilization and touching on how they perform in each of the modes. So stay tuned. We have a lot to cover. So let's jump right into things. And let's start with something that I think is a bit of an obvious pick. It's going to set the benchmark, and I think it's time to do it. It's time to add a row above. We need to create our very first S+ tier, because there is a civilization that should go right there. And if you're not thinking it's French, you're crazy, because French is absolutely the best civilization out of all of them for team games. You see them all the time, and here's why. In team games, the maps are bigger. And so mobility of units is a much more important factor than in a 1v1 scenario. Your ability to get across the map to raid your opponents and/or defend your allies is truly one of the most key elements of team games. So that means that civilizations with strong cavalry will be ranked higher on this list. And who has stronger cavalry than the French? Their ability to get feudal knights, their ability to get royal bloodlines in castle for a much stronger power spike with their knights, and their ability to discount their knights in the late game by surrounding their castles with stables means that they end up really performing well, and you see them all the time, and for good reason. Even when French wasn't strong, people were complaining about how strong French knights were in the game. So French takes that spot, and we really can't talk about French without talking about some English. In 2v2, one of the strongest combinations is French and English, and in this case also Jeanne d'Arc in English. And the reason for that is that the ability for those players to put an insane amount of feudal pressure on both opponents is so strong. They have an advantage because the French player can mass only knights, the English player can mass only longbows, and your opponents, in this case, are always going to have to go for a mix. Because if you choose to commit one of you to only do spears and one of you to only do horsemen or archers, then the French player can simply pivot. They can go to the person who doesn't have the spears and cause chaos and cause huge amounts of idle time and damage while your other ally is slowly moving their spears to your base to help defend you. You need a combination of both, and it's just an extremely strong strategy. You see it all the time. You know that it's coming, but even so, it's still hard to deal with. And it is truly probably one of the most powerful strategy in team games. If you're able to try the French and English strat, it is very strong. So French are strong for that reason, but English are down in A tier, not as high as S tier, because once you go higher into the team games, English don't really have great cavalry. They have really strong ranged longbows, but one of the main strengths of English is their early pressure in that feudal age. And so when the maps get bigger, by the time you're marching longbows across the map from your council hall, there's some civilizations that have already aged up to castle. They have men-at-arms walking towards you, and your longbows are simply just going to tickle them at that point. So the early pressure that English is able to put on in smaller map sizes is kind of negated as you get larger. Their knights are not particularly impressive. There's no unique upgrades there. They do have very strong man-at-arms. The armor cladding upgrade that they're able to get makes it so that those are very hard to deal with as you get going. So they're still a strong civilization and can definitely get rolling, but because they're not able to take advantage of one of their strong points, which is putting on that early aggression and kind of suffocating you with those longbows, they're just not quite as strong. And so the reason why the best combination in 2v2 is French and English is not because English is particularly good. It's because French kind of is there, and then English shores up all of French's weaknesses. So English is an A tier in this case. But now let's jump into something that I think is a little bit shocking. And if you're going to take anything away from this video, it would be this pick. And this again is based on my opinion. It's based on the hundreds of games I played with friends. It's based on my talking with people who continue to play team games as well, and some research on AoE4world.com. And I think Ayyubids is the second strongest civilization in team games compared to French. And here's why. They can rush castle extremely easily, especially on the larger map sizes, without kind of going under any pressure. And they have a very fast mounted unit that happens to also debuff all enemy cavalry just by being around. If you can get a significant mass of camel lancers as the Ayyubids, then you are golden, because you know the enemy team is going to be building cavalry for that mobility bonus that I was talking about before. But if you're able to debuff that by using your own mobile units, it's just so strong. And I think it's something that not a lot of people are taking advantage of. That, coupled with the fact that you can build dervishes, which can fly across the map and grab tons of relics after going fast castle, you can really quickly shore up your weaknesses of not having boomed to a larger base size with, say 2TC or 3TC, like an Abbasid would, for instance. You're able to continue to keep your economy going with that additional gold. If you go up with the villager upgrade where you get additional villagers and castle, again, you're kind of boosting your economy in that way as well. And it allows you to really, really put a lot of pressure on and counter something that you know your opponents are going for. So the Ayyubids with their camel lancers is extremely strong. Their Manjaniques with their ability to burn down buildings by toggling on that the flaming siege is extremely strong when you're up there kind of doing some raiding. So they are, I think, the second strongest civilization in larger team games. I don't think they're that great in 2v2 necessarily, but if you're able to get an Ayyubid player on your team in 3v3 and 4v4, definitely consider it. Next up, I think we're throwing Rus in S tier for similar reasons to the French. But not only do they have really amazing knights, arguably better than French once they're fully upgraded, but they also have the horse archers. And horse archers in mass are very, very oppressive. If your opponent is not walled up and you have a mass of horse archers, they're going to shred the enemy villagers. And they can honestly shred enemy knights and also men-at-arms pretty effectively as well. They do require a lot of micro. So at that point, you are kind of tunneled in on focusing on your army pretty significantly, whereas, people who have knights can kind of just A-move and maybe go and raid on different points. You really do want to be keeping your army with horse archers kind of your main focus. But yeah, they are definitely a strong civilization. Professional scouts with all the additional deer for both these French and Rus is still extremely strong. So definitely a very good one to choose. Particularly right now, the ranked map pool has hideout. You can throw tons of hunting cabins all around the tree perimeter there and get an absolutely massive amount of passive gold by taking advantage of that as well. Let's go towards kind of the opposite side of things. Japanese, disappointing to say the least. They got a bunch of buffs in Dark Age. So we're talking about English not being able to put pressure on in Feudal Age. Japanese in Dark Age are absolutely not going to be able to do any damage. By the time you have a Dark Age samurai that's walked all the way across the map to hit your opponent's gold mine that is hopefully on the front side, it's not going to go well. They're just going to completely push that back, going to be super far behind. So that was an advantage that the Japanese got in the most recent patch that is completely pretty much not applicable for team games. They do have mounted samurai, but man, the Japanese they feel so slow. There's something about them that they can't seem to really get rolling. 2TC isn't really a big thing with the Japanese. You do get the passive stone while gathering your gold, but at the same time, I've played alongside a bunch of Japanese. I played with against the Japanese civilization as well, and I don't see the moment where they are able to kind of overwhelm in the same way that some of these other civilizations can. So that's why they're a little bit further down. I'm going to grab another civilization here. I'm going to throw the Ottomans into B tier. They have Janissaries, really great for countering the cavalry that you know your opponent is going, but at the same time, Janissaries, they're so slow in comparison to the speed and mobility of the knights. They'll just run around you. If you can get to the point, as the Ottomans, where you have military schools pumping Janissaries, and you have 3 or 4 great bombards, sure, you are a force to be reckoned with. But getting to that point, past some of the early castle pressure, I just don't see it for the Ottomans. If you can get there, they're really, really strong, but it takes them a while to ramp up. And I just don't think they're as strong as some of the other civilizations that you could possibly choose on this list. Next up, we're going to go with an interesting one. I'm going to put Delhi in A tier above English. And it's because they're kind of tricky. I played with a friend of mine who plays a lot of Delhi, and we won a significant number of team games in 3v3 and 4v4 just by capturing the sacred sites early, due to the fact that Delhi can do so in the feudal age. It puts a timer on your opponents, and if you're against somebody like an HRE that is rushing to Imperial Age and taking their time looking to build up their force, all of a sudden having that 10-minute timer ticking down much earlier than they were expecting, it can win games. And there have been several times when, even my teammates are just kind of getting up and rolling, and all of a sudden a friend of mine was kind of like, hey, just so you know, we got 3 minutes left on the sacred sites. And it's like, oh, we can just win in 3 minutes. This is amazing. So they are tricky. So every once in a while, depending on the map, if you're able to get control of all 3 sacred sites, they're a strong, strong civilization. Plus the fact that then they can get up to castle. Elephants are really, really slow, so that's why they're not higher on this list. Even though they're super strong, getting them across the map is a slog. Like, if your elephant started now from one side of a 4v4 map and tried to walk to the other side, they might get there by the time this video is done. That's how slow they are. So, they're A. If you can kind of sneak a Delhi player onto your team, it can be a sneaky way to suddenly grab a win when your opponents are not necessarily expecting it. Jeanne d'Arc is an S tier civ as well. I'd say they might be a little bit higher than the Rus, to be honest. They're great in 2v2. Replacing the French with Jeanne d'Arc, having her able to level up as a result of all of that feudal fighting you're going to be doing, getting experience from 2 players at the same time, she can very, very quickly hit level 3. And at that point, in feudal age, if you're stuck there or your opponents are stuck there, you're just going to be able to bowl over them. So very strong. Arguably, could be better than French in 2v2 potentially, if you got a really good Jeanne d'Arc player, or you yourself are a great Jeanne d'Arc player. Once things go higher, it's hard to move the hero around, especially in feudal, to get enough experience before she ends up being completely overwhelmed by some of the forces that the other civilizations are able to put together. Still quite strong though. And again, you're dealing with those knights, and if you can get Jeanne d'Arc upgraded, she truly becomes a force to be reckoned with. So still no slouch by any means, and I still would put her potentially as the 3rd most powerful civilization in team games. You probably don't want a French and a Jeanne d'Arc, but if you're kind of choosing between the 2, she is definitely a strong choice for those larger maps. Holy Roman Empire. Again, I'm going to put them at the top of A tier here, and they should be S tier. And here's why they're not S tier. You're also predictable. Every single Holy Roman Empire player rushes castle, and then rushes Imperial, grabs all the relics, then rushes Imperial, and then masses Man-at-Arms and Lance Connect and maybe throws in a few spears. It happens all the time. Imagine an alternate scenario where still you rush castle, you still grab all the relics with your Regnitz Cathedral, giving you a huge boost of gold. But instead of going Man-at-Arms and Lance Connect, you know your opponent is going to be going crossbows, because you know that your opponent is going to be trying to counter some of the mobile knights that are coming their way. You know that somebody else on your team is going to be building knights if you're not. So build horsemen and archers. Build a huge mass of very fast archers thanks to marching drills, a huge mass of horsemen thanks to the fact that you have a great economy with the Aachen Chapel, and get to Imperial Age, get all your upgrades with all that extra gold you're not spending on units, and then you become the holy bank of HRE. You can start siphoning gold to your allies because you're the one who's got all this passive gold coming in. So instead of focusing on building gold units, you build a ton of units that counter what your enemy is building. It doesn't have to be the Man-at-Arms. It can be this Horseman-Archer combo. And then you can just essentially fund your allies' army with all that passive gold you're not spending. I think this is a strategy that's extremely underutilized with the Order of the Dragon and could potentially push them into S tier if it was utilized that way. But everybody does the same thing, and they are very susceptible to to an earlier rush when they're trying to rush castle and trying to rush Imperial. build some horsemen, build some archers, protect yourself, and then use that to be essentially fund your allies going forward into the late game. A strategy worth trying, I think. Order of the Dragon is S tier. They have such an amazing ability to boom up. If you're able, especially in a 4v4 map, to get yourself 2 town centers with Order of the Dragon, and then also collect some relics with Regnitz Cathedral, the economy of this civilization is insane. And their ability to pump out truly unbelievably powerful units is unmatched by any other civilization, period. So they are definitely a civilization where you want to be paired up with people who are going to be the aggressors, who are going to be buying you that time and space. But in terms of a booming civ, I think Order of the Dragon might be the best. If you're going to be the person who's kind of sitting back and kind of hoping to build up towards the late game, their late game hand cannoneers are insane. Their gilded crossbowmen are insane. Their gilded knights are insane. And the thing is that especially at the level we're talking about, which is that plat to diamond to low conqueror, they're just not going to be able to, your opponents are not going to be able to accurately kind of predict how the fights are going to go. They're not going to be familiar with running into a huge force of Order of the Dragon or a smaller force of Order of the Dragon, and suddenly their entire army's been wiped out because you have much more powerful units than they do. So definitely a civilization to consider if you have the people who are playing the more aggressive civilizations like French who are going to buy you that space, then Order of the Dragon is some of the best booming you can do. I'm going to put Abbasid in the B tier above the Ottomans for one specific reason only. In this level, if you have an Abbasid player on your team, there's like a 75% chance they are playing SimCity and they're going 4 town centers to try and make it to Imperial Age with 800 villagers, and then they'll start playing the game in terms of building a military. How many games have we all lost from your Abbasid teammate having 4 town centers and no units, and then being completely overwhelmed by 2 people on the other side of the map that you can't help them with? So those bad experiences have left a bad taste in my mouth with Abbasid, I think. They are an amazing boom civ. They also have the same benefit of the Ayyubids, where they're able to build camels in order to debuff the cavalry. So that should put them a little bit higher into A tier, but they're too slow. In 2v2, I would say don't even think about it. You're going to be running into way too many French-English players who will just pounce on you. And if you go military wing, good news, you got 2 archers, 2 spears to deal with their entire armies. And if you go eco wing, by the time you get that second town center up, it will be burned down to the ground by a huge force that is coming your way. So they're just not great in team games. They can be, though. Again, like Order of the Dragon, if you have allies who are going to be able to buy you that time and space and protect you when you're kind of weaker, they absolutely can become very strong. Their camel riders in Imperial Age with full upgrades are almost unstoppable, especially when you're dealing with a lot of cavalry civilizations, which you will be in that case. So they're good, but we've all had some bad experiences with Abbasid, and it's not my first choice in terms of a booming civ. That's for sure. Malians. Malians, I'm going to put here. I think they're a really strong civ. The ability for your ally who's a Malian to then utilize your gold mine as a pit mine and have a bunch of safe pit mines around on that side are really strong. Getting that cow boom up means that they can start flooding with units. It's kind of like the Ottomans, but better, in my opinion. You kind of get the ability to just kind of, and the Japanese actually, just kind of throw out a ton of units. You can just like mass a huge army relatively quickly once you get that ball rolling, if you can kind of get a little bit of space. They are also really good at professional scouts at the moment because their scouts are much more powerful and tankier. So yeah, they're in a solid spot. They're not my first pick for a teammate in terms of civilization, but they're definitely strong. And I wouldn't be unhappy to have a Malian on my team, especially once we get a little bit later in the game. They can start making problems. They do have weaker sofa as a result of, weaker mounted units having the sofa, which are not as strong as those knights. But yeah, they're still strong, and they can definitely get a huge mass going with Musafati, just all of a sudden flooding the map, which is a place where you might want to be. Next up, let's talk about the Byzantines. They are so strong, man. The Byzantines thrive when they have space. And what gives them better space than a 3v3 or a 4v4 map? We'll talk about 2v2 in a second, but having so much space for the Byzantines means that they can get up to castle relatively quickly, they can get their cisterns up and running, they can get their farm transition over with, be pumping olive oil, and they also have the advantage, if they go the javelin contract, to create camels. Also, in 3v3 and 4v4, you normally have a safe trade post that's somewhat close. So if you're able to take advantage of the mercenaries there, all of a sudden you are the one with the French Royal Knights coming out of the woodwork. But yeah, their ability to kind of mass castles and mass just like a whole kind of smorgasbord of units. You never know what you're going to get with the Byzantines. It's just like a whole combination. They're very, very strong, and they can definitely do really well even on 1 TC. You get 5 cisterns around where they're gathering with all those farms, and their economy is potentially better than some people who have gone 2 TC at that point. So really, really strong pick. They don't have great cavalry in the cataphracts. They're okay. They're super tanky, but they're not amazing. And missing that charge really loses some of the oomph there. But they are really great at kind of pressing through armies using their charge ability and getting to the back line of siege. So definitely an advantage that they have there. The one thing I did want to talk about is they're also really good in 2v2 because you can do a really cheesy build. You know, it's known as the jiggly turd build when you lose and the beastie build when you win, with the cistern of the first hill and the gulping. If you have an ally of yours who is playing more aggressively and buys you just a little bit of space in order to go straight castle and then start pumping out cataphracts and keshiks that are gulping, you can overwhelm the opponent very, very easily. And I would say that the gulp strategy is potentially even stronger against 2v2 or in 2v2 in comparison to 1v1. So they're really, really strong. And if you're not going to be playing French and English, consider using the Byzantine gulp strategy in 2v2, and I think you're going to see a lot of success. Next up, we're going to go with Jushi's Legacy. Jushi is the strongest civilization in the game right now, but they're hard to play. I would almost be tempted, based on the level we're talking about, which is Plat, Diamond, Low Conqueror, to put them in A tier, just because people at this range are not going to be able to take advantage of those small micro optimizations that make Jushi just kind of that next level of strong. But they are a strong civilization. They have really strong cavalry with their upgrades. Their horsemen are insane. Their Yuan raiders in Imperial Age as well can be super, super powerful if you choose to get that technology. So I'm going to keep them in kind of bottom of S tier because they're very strong. If you have the ability to play Jushi's Legacy at a high level, if you're familiar enough with China and you want to switch over to this, they are really, really strong. They can get that huge granary transition and that food transition up and running. And do a good job defending themselves and putting out a lot of pressure. Even just the very typical Jugunu rush can do pretty well, but be careful with that. You don't want to commit too long to the Jugunu rush. That's the one thing I see. You know, they create a mass of 20 and are able to push in and completely destroy one of their opponents, which is amazing. But then they keep making Jugunu, and all of a sudden they have 50 Jugunu against like completely upgraded castle or imperial knights or man-at-arms. And those Jugunu are just, you know, they're tickling at that point. And there's a mass that very quickly gets overwhelmed and they get completely wiped. So don't fall into that trap. If you're going to do an early Jugunu push, commit to that for a while, take one of the opponents out of the equation, then take a step back, focus on your economy, and then push back out with a different unit composition. Definitely more focusing on crossbows is what I would say. We are starting to run through these civilizations. We're down to 2 left. Let's talk about China. China's an A-tier civilization. I'm going to put them just a little bit behind HRE in the A-tier here. Again, they're like Jushi, but a little bit worse, I would say, in team games. But that being said, they are a good booming civ. They're better than Abbasid. They're probably not as good, in my opinion, as Order of the Dragon. But man, if you can get China rolling and you can get Song Dynasty and you can get multiple TCs, then the flood of palace guards that suddenly comes from these guys, because palace guards are quite quick, can be a really, really strong strategy. And then they get to Imperial Age, and again, they're hand cannoneers, gaining health from the Spirit's Way landmark whenever they're taking damage and whenever they're fighting. Really, really strong. So they're definitely a great choice. They have to get to that point, though. And they're, again, a civilization where you kind of need allies in order to help you and kind of give you that space that you need in order to get to that point. The last civilization we have, all of a sudden, is the Mongols. And the Mongols are super strong. I'm going to put them a little bit behind the JD and above the Byzantines. I think the Mongols are really good. Their ability to mass Mangudai, everybody hates the Mangudai. Once they get into your base, once they're at Imperial Age and they're fully upgraded, how do you even stop them? They are truly a menace and can just cause insane amounts of eco damage. They are truly the raiding civilization. So if you have lots of APM, lots of multitasking ability, building Keshiks and building Mangudai, you're just going to start to really cause problems for your opponents in a big way. Again, not as great in the smaller maps in kind of 2v2, but once you get larger into the 3v3, 4v4, they are definitely strong and worth considering. So there's nobody in D tier, it looks like, but this is, I think, where I would kind of put the civilizations when we're ranking them in teams. What I want to do now is I want to go back and just talk about the ideal composition for 2v2, 3v3, and 4v4, kind of giving you a couple of different options. So if you were playing with friends, you're able to kind of create maybe the ideal team comp that has the best strengths and kind of mitigates the weaknesses of all the different civilizations. Give you a couple of different ideas for those kind of sections. And also if you play alone and you happen to see what civilizations your friends are playing, first of all, if you play alone, salutes to you. You have my respect. You're also a bit crazy. I have done the same thing occasionally myself, and man, it's a rough time out there queuing solo for games. I will say if you're queuing solo, probably stay away from 2v2. You're going to go up against a lot of people who have somebody else in a voice call, and their synergy is just going to be able to outperform, and you're just going to be at a disadvantage in that case. I personally queue for 3v3 and 4v4. I think 3v3 is the sweet spot because you still are able to kind of help on the map as much as you can with your allies. They're close enough. 4v4, you start to run into, who knows who you have on your team. You have 3 separate allies who are all going to be doing their own thing, and you never know what you're going to get in that particular thing. But yeah, this is the tier list. French is the best. Please consider checking out Ayyubids, Jeanne d'Arc to replace French if you'd like. And then we go down towards the bottom here. And again, it's the Abbasid, Ottoman, Japanese that I think have kind of failed to impress on the team game side of things, at least in my opinion. So let's jump now to 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, the ideal team comps if you could possibly choose exactly who you wanted on your team. All right, so for 2v2, we've already talked about it. The French-English or Jeanne d'Arc English combination, I think, is one of the best you could possibly do. I think in 2v2, you definitely want somebody who's playing French or JD or Rus on your team. Having that early feudal pressure is just so strong. And I personally have played with a friend of mine who plays Rus. I played English. And that early longbow knight pressure can just tear people to shreds in the early game. And it's definitely a strong combination. If you're not looking to go with that, again, I was talking about it earlier, a French-Byzantine combo I think is really strong. And could be worth doing. The French is going to buy you that little bit of space you need with the early raids while you go straight up to castle and start gulping, and you can kind of mow down people from there thanks to the fact you have massive healing and you're going to be able to dive under people's TCs and cause huge amounts of idle time there. So those are my 2 recommendations for 2v2. For 3v3, again, you're going to be wanting French as kind of your baseline. And this is where I kind of would put Ayyubids as the second civilization you could potentially want. You know there's going to be cavalry on the other side. The maps are small enough that you're going to be able to grab all the relics with those dervish. So having Ayyubids as the second, I think, would be ideal. And then for number 3, you could kind of do something funky and go Delhi and kind of focus on a sacred site victory in that way with that kind of a strategy. On the other side, I think it might be worthwhile if you're not going to go with like another cavalry civ like a Rus. Maybe having a bit of a boom civ could be useful. So I think maybe it would be like a French Ayyubid Order of the Dragon might be my ideal. Or French Ayyubid Byzantine, I think would be what I would call the top tier possible team compositions for 3v3. So give that a try. Let me know how it works out. I think that would be, if I loaded in a game with those civilizations, I would say, okay, this is really, really good. 4v4, Again, French, they're S plus tier for a reason. They are the base. Again, you can swap French out with Jeanne d'Arc if you would like. You want the Ayyubids, but in this case, you could switch Ayyubids for Abbasid. Because again, Abbasid has the access to those camels as well. And the larger map sizes means that you kind of can potentially buy your ally more space to boom up on that Abbasid side. The next one, you got to throw Mongols in there. When you're in a large 4v4 situation and you have those Mongol raiding with the Magadai at that point, dealing with all the spears and crossbows that you know are going to be coming out to deal with the French knights, and in this case, the either the camel riders or the Ayyubid camel lancers, really, really strong to have yourself a Mongol player. And again, if you're not going to be going with the Abbasid, who's your boom civ, I think having Order of the Dragon in this case would be your ideal, or Holy Roman Empire, because there's so many relics on the map. You can get up there and you can cause massive problems. The Holy Roman Empire could potentially fulfill that man-at-arms, or as I was saying to you before, go that horseman archer composition and use the gold to just funnel it into your French ally, your Ayyubid ally, and your Mongol ally, allowing the Mongols to get all their fancy upgrades as well, and just causing a lot of problems. Again, the Mongols can't wall, so you're going to have to be taking that into consideration in order to help wall your ally in that case with your civilizations. And that's why maybe HRE and OOTD might be the best choice. You're going to be getting up to Imperial relatively quickly, and then you're going to be able to be throwing bombard towers down and stone walls down and protecting yourself in that way. So that's my thoughts on team games. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have I completely missed the mark here? Do you think it's completely wrong? I would love to hear what you're thinking. There's a couple more weeks left in the season, so fingers crossed you can use some of this knowledge, jump back in with your friends, or jump in solo and grind your way to the rank that you deserve in this season of Age of Empires 4. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you got to this point, again, if you can throw a subscribe. We're still early days and trying to grow the channel. Would really, really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. We'll be doing some more AoE4 content coming soon, and looking forward to the DLC. Can't wait to see some more info coming out on that as well. Again, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one, and bye for now.